And the crowd goes wild. Also sprach Zarathustra. Now, how's that for an intro? Yeah, I'm definitely going to get demonetized for this for, using that music, but it's totally worth it. You guys have probably heard that from 2001, A Space Odyssey, one of the greatest movies of all time. But the song actually was made previously to that. It's called Also Sprach Zarathustra. I forgot. It's by some guy named Strauss. Not to, poo-poo on that guy. Like, props to him. But basically, he was inspired by Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is the, Nietzsche's magnum opus. And so Nietzsche very much was a big fan and lover of music. So if he was alive to hear that, he would probably be in tears to describe his works. But yeah, we're going to be covering Nietzsche today. More specifically, we're going to be covering him from a self-improvement aspect. And there's a reason that in my content, I can't stop simping for him. I can't stop talking about him because he is the philosopher for self-improvement. Nobody else even comes close, because the entire point, like everything that he talks about, is revolved around his reader becoming the best person that he can be. And, he has a lot of other more kind of complicated concepts here and there that I'm not going to get into here. But in terms of from a self-improvement, self-development standpoint, there's nobody better because he's such a keen observer of the human condition. And more specifically, he's radically honest with himself. And it's just a character trait that not many people in history have, to be so honest with how they view themselves and how they view humanity. And that's why, a lot of people consider him one of like the first psychologists, even though he technically wasn't a, psychologist, because he was just such a keen observer of the human mind and the human condition. So I'm going to start this off. I have a whole presentation prepared for y'all because I want this to be kind of a replayable thing. I'm sure, knowing me being the perfectionist and wanting to represent his ideas the best as well as possible, I'll probably go back and refilm this at some point. But, so much of what I do on this channel is revolved around the things that I've learned from Nietzsche. And I truly believe him to be my mentor. I've actually had like in-person mentors and stuff, of course, but, nobody comes close to the mentor that Nietzsche is for me. And I would love to sort of share that with you guys here today. And just so that you guys understand why I talk about him so much, and then what value more specifically you can find from him. Okay. So I'm going to be referencing this book a few times here. Highly suggest if you ever want. This is a little bit more complicated than meets the eye. It looks like, oh, well, maybe it just explains Nietzsche and everything. There's actually better books to do that. This actually has some of his core works within it, as well as some notes here and there. It's written by and translated by somebody named Walter Kaufmann, who is kind of like the foremost Nietzsche translator and Nietzschean scholar, I guess. He's dead now, unfortunately, but so he gives a lot of insights and stuff here. And I want to read one of the last parts of the introduction to this so that you kind of understand what Nietzsche is all about, from the words of, probably the most well-known, I guess you would call him Nietzschean scholar, I don't know, of all time. But let me just read this here. It's at the very end of the introduction by Walter Kaufmann. Nietzsche does not want to be read as an arsenal of arguments for or against something, nor even for a point of view. He challenges the reader not so much to agree or disagree as to grow. So the entire, it's interesting. You see people all across the political spectrum, the left to the right, all of them simp for Nietzsche in some way or another. Maybe some people like very much so people on the very far right, like the alt right, they just take the idea of the Ubermensch to as evidence for their they completely bastardize the idea of the Ubermensch, which we will be talking about here today, in terms of to try to fit into their white supremacist rhetoric. And unfortunately, that comes from the fact that the Nazis did that. So I want to actually, Walter Kaufmann is a Jew himself, and he actually has a book that brought Nietzsche more into the mainstream because after World War II, people were like, "Oh my God, Nietzsche's this Nazi guy that people look up to," and he sort of dispelled that in a book called Nietzsche, Philosopher, Psychologist, Antichrist, or something like that, where actually he was not only was he not anti-Semitic, he actually thought the Jews were pretty cool. He actually came to their defense and thought that they were extraordinary people. So anyway, that's a whole other thing. And more recently, kind of contemporary, I guess, online philosophers, if you want to call them, like Jordan Peterson, talk about Nietzsche all the time because, again, Jordan Peterson, he's a psychologist, right? And so Nietzsche's very much all psychologists read Nietzsche at some point. I'm pretty sure, especially because he just has such good insights and stuff, or all psychologists should. I wouldn't trust a psychologist who hasn't read Nietzsche, to be honest, because then they just don't, they take for granted the things that they learn. But anyway, and then people all the way on the left, a lot of leftists you will see love Nietzsche. More specifically, over the past century, the postmodernists, or as Jordan Peterson would like to call them, the postmodern neo-Marxists, they all love Nietzsche. So philosophers like Foucault, Sartre, Sartre's girlfriend, I forgot the fuck her name is, and a bunch of other people. They were all heavily inspired by Nietzsche. Also, Freud was extremely inspired by Nietzsche, and so was Carl Jung. Freud even went so far as to say, Sigmund Freud, he said, "I need to stop reading Nietzsche because if I keep reading him, I won't be able to come up with my own ideas because Nietzsche already discovered them." All right. So all of these titans, these intellectual titans, they all venerate Nietzsche. That's how much of a genius this guy was. Jordan Peterson actually had one book, or not one book. He had one lecture where he said the best way to describe Nietzsche is, somebody said, "Oh, he's like a 1 in a million type thinker." No, he's a 1 in a billion type thinker. And that's absolutely true. I consider myself a pretty intelligent guy. I've never really read anybody where I'm just like, this guy is like so much smarter than me that Nietzsche's the only person that's happened to. It literally feels like when you're reading him, it feels like you're reading an alien, like a hyper intelligent alien. And the fact that so many people have not read him or don't understand him or aren't familiar with his work, it's a travesty. It really is, because I cannot begin to even describe how much this guy has changed my life, changed my entire view and perspective on the world. And in a way, everything that I talk about when it comes to self-improvement on this channel, it's all inspired by him in one way or another. All right. So how's that for an introduction? On this channel here, we don't simp for women, but we do simp for philosophers. Okay. So I'm just going to get into the presentation here and we will go from there. Okay. Hold on one second. Let me, I need to share this presentation. And a lot of people dedicate their entire lives to, Nietzsche. So, I'm not going to act like you're going to learn everything that you can about Nietzsche, because I haven't even learned everything I can about him myself. I've read most of his works, especially his later ones, which are all the most important ones in his perspective. So he basically thinks, okay, well, the most important works that he has, or he considers his magnum opus, Thus Spoke Zarathustra. And then after that, he wrote Beyond Good and Evil and the Genealogy of Morals to kind of try to observe what he wrote in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, right? Now, a lot of times when you read Nietzsche, because there's kind of the way that he writes is so dense, a lot of times it seems kind of inaccessible. Sometimes you're just like, oh, well, I don't know what the fuck these words are that he's saying. the actual the reason that his works feel so dense is because he had this severe medical condition where he was like always sick and everything, and he could only really write like a paragraph a day. So he'd just be basically like thinking about it all day while like writhing in pain, and then just come up with these like freaking, you know, like these sentences that are just incredible. I think it was in Beyond Good and Evil. He basically says something like, you know, I say more in one paragraph than most authors write in entire books, or something like that. Um, and it's true. It's absolutely true. So, if I'm a passionate writer myself. If I could even come even like 10% close to like as great of a writer as he is, then I would, you know, my life would be complete. Yeah. So I'm a simp. I don't apologize. He is the philosopher for self improvement. The only other philosopher that I would say is close to his level, just in a different way, he provides more of a framework, is Aristotle, more specifically Nicomachean ethics. And there's this sect of philosophy called virtue ethics, where it focuses on the moral goodness of the individual. And in a way, Nietzsche's kind of a virtue ethicist himself, kind of. I mean, in the loosest sense of the term, because his whole idea of what does good even mean is a central theme of a lot of his works. He thinks that good is subjective. That's for a whole other thing. Again, with this specific stream, we are going to be talking about his philosophy when it comes to self-improvement, which is in a way is almost the entire point of why he writes. Um, so, and I'll get to that in a second. Okay. So here's some core concepts that we need to keep in mind. And I don't expect any of you guys to like maybe even remember all this, but this is more for me to be able to remember it and talk about it and kind of just weave everything through so that you can practically use Nietzsche when it comes to your own self-improvement journey. All right. So the first, probably the most famous thing that he's known for is the whole thing of God is dead. God is dead and we have killed him. I'll get to that in a second. Another thing he's famous for is the Übermensch, which a lot of people have really just don't understand what it is. And in a way, Nietzsche kind of he's kind of very clear with what the Übermensch is, but also he's kind of vague for a reason. And again, like I said at the beginning when I read the intro of the guy that wrote this book, Nietzsche cares more about the reader than anything, rather than just making like absolute moral statements and absolute claims, or trying to have this like expansive philosophy. He literally is a like one of the first, you know, self-help, self-improvement writers, except it was just like so radically honest and so intense that people just shut it off. But that's usually when you know that there's some truth to it. Nietzsche himself believed in this. He's famous for saying, you know, any philosopher worth listening to is always the bad conscience of his day. Basically saying that any radical thinker, anyone who's really that original and has something very profound to say, it always goes against the grain of what contemporary society believes is acceptable or believes is okay. And he knew this for himself. Unfortunately, he died basically in poverty. All of his great works that everybody just talks about today, and says, "Oh my God, this is amazing." People barely bought them back in the day. The people who did buy them, they're just like, "This is the smartest person I've read." But a lot of people, he just his ideas were so ahead of his time that people just couldn't handle it. And it's a shame because a lot of people that have sort of paved the way for, you know, contemporary thought and philosophy and just, you know, things that we take for granted, a lot of times they weren't appreciated during their time, and Nietzsche was one of them. It was very unfortunate. He actually did become appreciated the last few years of his life, but unfortunately in the last 10 years of his life he went fucking crazy, and he literally lost his mind. I think it's possible that like he started thinking in such levels of abstraction that like he literally lost his sanity. Like he couldn't connect to the real world anymore and he just went crazy. Something that also kind of happened to is Carl Jung, which is, you know, Carl Jung was heavily inspired by Nietzsche as well. Um, but yeah, anyway, that kind of just adds a little bit to the mythos that is Friedrich Nietzsche. Um, so yeah, I will be paying attention to the chat a little bit here and there, but not too much because again, I want this to be sort of timeless. All right, Fight Club has this philosophy, absolutely. They do, but I would say Fight Club is more so has more Jungian ideas, in my opinion, which in a way is always is because Jung was so inspired by Friedrich Nietzsche. I'm going to do a whole analysis on that later on, but basically, you know, Tyler Durden is the personification of the narrator's shadow. And that's actually Nietzsche did talk about the shadow. He was the first person to kind of come up with it, but he didn't really expand upon it too much. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he actually does mention, a shadow type figure, which is very similar to what Carl Jung talked about. God, I love philosophy streams. I don't care if there's 15 people in here. This one. Hey, thanks, bro. I really appreciate that, and I totally agree because it's like this is the stuff that matters. Um, and I'm amazed that there's even 15 of you guys in here right now. Like I could easily just make a stream be like, guess what Fresh and Fit did, and it'll be like 100 something viewers, right? But I do something like this, is going to be less. Funny enough, that leads us into one of our next topics. Is Nietzsche wrote for a very specific type of person. And this is going to be related to, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse here, but this is going to be related to master and slave morality, more specifically, the higher men in the herd. So Nietzsche believed that there were basically two types of people. It's a kind of a reductionist way of, he thought there's more than two types of people, but just bear with me. He believed that there were basically herd, like sheep, and higher men. So the herd, which is, probably like 80% of people, are just people who just kind of want to be taken care of, right? They're almost sort of reacting to the norms of society, as opposed to what he believed were the higher men, are people who are kind of capable of carving their own path, capable of creating their own values. And those are the people that he wrote for, people who are radical free thinkers. He actually calls them, if you guys see right here, the philosophers of the future, attempters who write in blood, which I'll talk about in a little bit. He called his writers attempters, people who are basically attempting to kind of create a new path and to bring humanity forward. And that's actually a little bit different than the Ubermensch. There's multiple different interpretations of the Ubermensch. I'll give you my interpretation of it. The Ubermensch, what he basically says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, is a goal for humanity to set for itself. Is it an actual person? Well, we'll get into that. But anyway, a lot of this ties down to or comes down to this whole idea of God is dead. So what does Nietzsche mean by God is dead? Well, during the time that he was alive, the scientific revolution was kind of going on, and a lot of people, their sense of right and wrong kind of come down to Christian morality, a Christian ethic. And that has been sort of the norm for thousands of years. And with science, and I guess, for lack of a better word, scientism becoming more and more popular, less people derive their values exclusively from Christianity. And what's interesting is Nietzsche himself was an atheist, but he didn't technically like Christianity. I think a lot of Christian people try to like almost act as if like Nietzsche liked Christianity. He didn't like Christianity. Okay, he just didn't. He's pretty clear about that in his works. But he saw it as a necessary thing, especially for the herd, right? Because again, like I said before, Nietzsche believed that there were basically two types of people: herd or sheep, and higher men type thinkers who can actually sort of think for themselves and aren't just like sort of plugged into the matrix, right? So, but he believed that for lack of a better word, the matrix was kind of an almost necessary thing for the vast majority of people in order for society to function. And he believed that with the whole proclamation of God is dead and we have killed him, that now that that's not like sort of the norm across the entirety of the West. All of these sheep, there's a vast majority of people, don't have an ethical code. They don't have a sense of morality. And so they don't know like what to do. They're basically just like running around, like arms flailing, being like, oh, what are we going to do now? Right. I need something to follow, because Nietzsche believed deep down everybody needs sort of something to believe in. They need to have meaning, which is why he is considered a forefather of the sect of philosophy called existentialism. Again, that's for a whole other thing. but I'm going to be saying that a lot for a whole other thing, because each of these I could literally do like a 10-hour stream on each of these plus more. This is me trying to like shave down the most important concepts specifically for self-improvement. As a side, I basically study this guy like hours a day because it's the things that he has to say really are that important. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, he didn't necessarily say God is dead as I was like, oh, like it was a celebration. It was kind of in a way, a lot of people say, oh, well, he was sad about it. Yes, kind of. He was more so just understanding, well, the next few hundred years of humanity is going to be bloody, because what ends up happening, so Christianity at the very least was predictable, right? But now that it's dead, now that it's not like a ubiquitous sort of ethical norm, now people are going to seek God, the idea of God, a highest value somewhere else. And you see that happen in the 20th century. A lot of people ended up doing that, with the state, for example, in communist Russia, especially with the Soviet Union, as well as gravitating toward fascist ideas, and then people clashing based on those values. I mean, it's no coincidence that the 20th century, especially the early 20th century, was the bloodiest period of human history, right? And this is something that Nietzsche kind of predicted. So that leads us to the idea of the Übermensch, all right? So the Übermensch is, in Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he's talking about like, oh, God is dead. But again, it's not in a celebratory sense, but like it kind of is. And this is where some people are going to disagree with me, but I will say this too. Nietzsche was a subjectivist. He was something called he introduced this sort of idea. I don't know if he's the introducer of it, but it's called perspectivalism, where basically there's multiple interpretations of the truth. He's not necessarily a moral relativist who says there's a bunch of interpretations of the truth and each of them are all equally valid. He does not say that, but he does say that there isn't an objective truth, that because everybody has a different subjective meaning they derive from that same supposed objective truth. I hope that wasn't too confusing there. So anyway, Nietzsche would say that if I personally interpret him in a certain way that differs from somebody else, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong, right? He's not necessarily saying that like we're both equally valid in our interpretations. He's just saying that this is like a different, like if I read him and get something different than somebody else, it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm wrong or they're wrong. If that makes sense. Again, because the entire reason that he's writing what he writes is for the reader. And I'm going to get to why. So the Übermensch, a lot of people might say, okay, well, how do I describe this? The Übermensch is pretty complicated. Okay. So the Übermensch is somebody who transvaluates values. So there was these certain valuations already that existed at the time of saying, okay, well, the values of contemporary Western society at the time that Nietzsche was alive, and then before that, or right before he proclaimed God is dead, was a Christian ethic, right? And so that's something that existed, for basically 2,000 years at that point. So there were different there was like a different ethic and cultural norms that people followed before Christianity. He just thought that Christianity was the most recent and most stable iteration of that, because it's lasted, thousands of years. And so with the proclamation of God is dead, now there's sort of a void, right? There's a void. There's not this kind of ubiquitous ethic that people can follow. And so, because of that, that would lead to potentially nihilism, that would lead to potentially moral relativism. And so, Nietzsche believed that the Ubermensch is somebody who can create new values, somebody who's like super powerful and like basically like the giga chad of giga chads. They can create their own values and create sort of a new normative ethic for all of society to follow. So basically, it's almost like imagine how much of an impact Jesus had, right, on the West. The Ubermensch would have the same, if not more, of an impact than Jesus had in Nietzsche's mind, more. And so, when it comes to who Nietzsche is writing for, people think, oh, well, he's writing to help people become the Ubermensch. Not necessarily, because the Ubermensch is technically, again, he's kind of wishy-washy about what the Ubermensch actually is, but he talks about it as if it's like a single person. And I think that that's probably true, that's what he believed, and I think that's my interpretation of it. So basically, the Ubermensch is like one singular being that is sort of inevitable that one day will transvaluate all values. And the people that he's writing for isn't specifically for the Ubermensch because there can only be one, right? Unless he just wanted one person to read him. Ideally, obviously, he wants the Ubermensch to read him too, whoever that might be someday. And no, the Ubermensch has not existed up until now and currently does not exist, or may not ever exist for that matter. But he wrote for the higher men. So the higher men are the types of people that I talked about before, the ones who aren't the sheep. Okay. And the higher men are supposed to pave the way by reading Nietzsche, but they're supposed to pave the way for the coming of the Ubermensch. So it's almost kind of playing into that sort of Christian theme of like, oh, well, the second coming of Christ. It's a little bit different, but, at least that's kind of the way I interpret it. It's like the second coming of Christ in Nietzsche's world is basically like the Ubermensch, but not from a Christian standpoint. I'm sure there's probably some theologians and stuff be like, no, that's wrong. And you're like, shut the fuck up. Okay. Again, if you say that this is a wrong interpretation of Nietzsche, that means you don't understand Nietzsche. That's like the least Nietzschean thing you could ever say. And if you have a different perspective than I do on it, then that's fine. We can compare and contrast ideas to try to seek the truth. Again, the entire point that Nietzsche is writing for is to help strengthen the higher men to pave the road for the Ubermensch. All right. He's not trying to, again, I'm going to read what Walter Kaufmann wrote at the beginning of this introduction here. It's very important. Nietzsche does not want to be read as an arsenal of arguments for or against something, nor even for a point of view. He challenges the reader not so much to agree or disagree, but as to grow. Right? So that's his main purpose. So this is so I don't know if you guys can see my cursor, but we actually might read the Zarathustra prologue a little bit, because the prologue kind of just lays out sort of the TLDR of his entire philosophy. But yeah, so this is a situation that Nietzsche was terrified of. He called them the last men, or I think in German it's called the letzter Mensch. For you two Germans that are watching this, you're probably like fucking punching your screens right now, being like, "You're not saying it correctly." So I apologize. So the last men is kind of the archetypal passive nihilist. If you Google it, that's what comes up. So what does that mean? A passive nihilist, and Nietzsche wrote about this in an unpublished work of his called The Will to Power. So this isn't necessarily his thought, because anybody who's a writer understands that you have all of these things that you write all the time that never get published because like you're just like, oh, that was a stupid idea I don't actually believe in. I'm not publishing that. So take it with a grain of salt. But he technically, in The Will to Power, made a distinction between a passive nihilist and an active nihilist. So a passive nihilist is somebody who is sick and tired of life, just lets life happen to them. Really, they're just addicted to comfort because they live in a decadent society. So what is decadence? Decadence is basically where things become so good that you start to like rot and decay. Like it's almost like you live in too comfortable of a life to the point where it goes against your animal instincts to try to survive, and then you start to kind of just like fight yourself, right? So that's at the bottom here, addiction to comfort. That's what that means. And so a decadent society will inevitably lead to the last men. These and you guys, you're already seeing this nowadays with the incels, the coomers, right? You can technically live inside of your home. You could just have some very like low key stay at home job. I don't know. You're probably not like whether you make a lot or not, it doesn't matter. You can technically not leave your house and just like stay in your home and just live like that until you die. You know, you just play video games all the time, just jerk off. You don't even have to interact with people. And you're so addicted to comfort because the world around you now is so nerfed up and cushy that you just don't care. You don't care and you become nihilistic because life is too comfortable. Who does that describe nowadays? This is why Nietzsche is more relevant than ever. Who does that describe? Describes the black pillars, more specifically the incel black pillars, but a lot of people, especially, the black pill, the nihilists, Nietzsche predicted, he literally predicted the incels. He did. He predicted the black pill movement. That's the last men here. Now, that was like a nightmare scenario for Nietzsche, right? And he believes that the last men are inevitable unless the Ubermensch rises up, transvaluates values, and helps move all of humanity forward. So Nietzsche's very kind of like elitist in his writing, right? Because he only cares about writing for what he called the higher men, which by definition is going to be a minority of people, probably like, I don't know, 10, 20% of people. Because a lot of people, they just can't think abstractly enough to appreciate what he's saying or even be able to apply it to their own lives. And some people might call that like elitist. He might be like kind of a dick for making a value judgment, saying like, oh, well, some people are way smarter than others. Some people will understand me, other people won't. But it's true. The fact that this stream right now has, we went up from 15 to 19. The fact that it has 19 viewers right now, as opposed to if I were to make a video about Fresh and Fit or a stream, it would have like 10 times more viewers. That says everything that you need to know. It literally proves that to be the case, that there's only some people who would actually appreciate what Nietzsche has to say and understand it and actually apply it to their own lives. Those are the higher men. If you have been watching this and you didn't tune out already, you have already sort of proven that you're one of the types of people who could actually benefit from Nietzsche. And it's impossible to talk about that with like the sheep and the higher men type thing without sounding like a complete elitist dickhead. Okay. But my interpretation of Nietzsche is that he still cared about the herd. He still cared about the majority of people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that the Ubermensch is somebody who would move all of humanity forward, not just the higher men, humanity forward. So he cared about the majority of people. He just said like the majority of people wouldn't be able to like, they wouldn't be able to conceptualize or use his works. And here and there, because he writes kind of facetiously and he's almost kind of like a troll some of the times, just part of also what makes him very entertaining. He kind of shits on people with that sort of herd mentality all the time. But at the end of the day, he does have this fundamental love, I think, for humanity. Some people might disagree with that. That's my interpretation of it. All right. Now, this is a central thing. Now, so that was a little bit of a background on that. I'm going to have to do so many presentations on this. Okay. So let's talk about this part now, Amor Fati. So Amor Fati, you've probably heard of it before. I'm pretty sure it's a popular thing that the Stoics popularized. And And funny enough, Nietzsche is actually critical of Stoicism. I'm not going to get into that here as to why, but in a way, he's very similar to Stoicism, even though he's critical of it. And amor fati basically means love of fate. It's Latin for love of fate. And it's a very important theme to think about because, again, because Nietzsche is so radically honest in his writings, he basically says that us as the higher men, us philosophers of the future, us attempters who write in blood, which I'll talk about in a second, the higher men that he writes for, that appreciate his works, people like myself, people like you guys, right? The very fact that you're still here watching and you didn't tune out because it's just like, where's the drama? Well, talk about Byron and why he's a beta male. I just want to see blood sport drama and that's it. The fact that you're still here, despite not having content like that, already proves that you're probably one of these higher men that he's talking about. All right. And the other higher men he talked about that were really higher men or really proved themselves were the great philosophers of the 20th century that interpreted his works. Whether you agree or disagree with them, they're technically the higher men because they're sort of free thinkers, right? So anyway, that's sort of the fate of people like us who are free thinkers. And, the entire point of what I'm trying to do with this channel is to take red pill aware men who see the world for how it is and try to live a great life based on what they see there, being radically honest with themselves, radically honest with the world around them, radically honest with the people that they interact with, and then try to live a great life with that information. Because what happens in this manosphere space is people get red pilled, but because they're sheep, because they have that herd mentality, they get unplugged from one matrix and back into another. That's a Rolo stance. That's the rational male stance. That's the fresh and fit stance. Those are the Andrew Tate stance, right? Nietzsche would fucking hate that stuff. He hates ideology. He's so against ideology that it's insane. But he also does believe that a central sort of ideology is important for the sheep to follow, because otherwise they'll just be somebody more nefarious can use them for their own nefarious means. So you see that in the manosphere itself, right? These supposed charismatic whatever guys, they don't give a fuck about their followers. They just care about the clout and the money and the status, and then they'll use their little army of indignant beta males for their own means. That's the exact type of thing that Nietzsche was worried about. He does not want that. He wants people to be individualistic, radically individualistic. And that's what I try to teach on this channel. And I have already accepted this fact that my channel, what I'm trying to do, will never be as popular as Fresh and Fit, as Andrew Tate, because I specifically do the things antithetical to bringing sheep toward me. The sheep are automatically going to reject me. And you see it all the time. The Fresh and Fit stands, the Tate stands, the Rolo stands. They reject me because I say I don't appeal to the herd. I say, if you're a sheep, go away. And so obviously these guys cope around because it sounds terrible. Be like, I'm not a sheep. I'm I'm a high value man. Sure you are, bro. Actions speak louder than words. A high value man, a higher man, doesn't need some guy to fanboy over and to follow like a little sheep. He figures things out on his own. And that's what I try to do on this channel. This is the movement I'm trying to create. Red pill aware men who are individual, radical, free thinkers that, sure, maybe, I'm a little bit further on the path in self-development, but you look at me as a mentor the same way I look at Nietzsche as a mentor or something like that, I don't necessarily think that I don't necessarily worship this guy. I sit for him, sure, but I'm still a radical free thinker. I still have my disagreements with Nietzsche. And funny enough, Nietzsche, he's authentic enough where he would be like, if somebody just started simping for him, to the point where they don't disagree with him, he'd be like, fuck you. That means you're not actually reading what I'm saying. Right. And so it'd be very disingenuous of me to use his powerful words for my own gain to try to create a cult following. I refuse to do that. It's one of the big things that Coach Banana Cell and I actually had a disagreement with. He was trying to create a cult. He was literally reading books on how to create a cult, and I was like, I don't think that's cool, man. Yeah, perspectivalism. That's a lot of people agree that Nietzsche was definitely perspectivalist for sure. Kevin, do you think there's a direct correlation between the higher man and those who experience trauma at a previous point of their lives, forcing them to strive towards such concepts? Ooh, so maybe not necessarily the higher man, but the Ubermensch. Yes, the Ubermensch is somebody who overcomes. So it's not necessarily somebody who's just born Mr. Giga Chad. Nietzsche has a very big emphasis on overcoming, right? The rough translation of the Ubermensch is Superman, but also Overman. It's somebody who overcomes the. This is a little bit more of an advanced concept here. So I have this here, master and slave morality. I'll try to explain that a little bit. It's a bit more complicated than what I'm about to say, but basically, in general, the higher men operate off of master morality. The sheep operate more off of slave morality. There's a whole dynamic there I'm not going to be able to get into here. But each and every one of us, even the best of us, still has master and slave morality within us. The Ubermensch is somebody who's able to transcend both his master and slave morality to create a new morality. A lot of psychologists say that that's like impossible. That's like psychologically impossible. But I guess the Ubermensch should be the one person who's be able to do it, right? If you guys read Mark Manson's, I think his most recent book and his best one by far, in my opinion, Everything is Fucked. At the very end, a lot of people are just like, he got all weird and stuff with like AI and stuff and all that. Mark Manson believes that AI is the Ubermensch, artificial intelligence, which it's a very interesting perspective. And I don't think he's necessarily wrong about that. Okay. So yeah, Amor Fati, you want to have a love of fate, right? It doesn't necessarily mean saying that, that you don't have, your life isn't in your hands. It's not saying that at all. But it basically, all the good things and all the bad things that happen to you, you should be thankful for it because it's an opportunity for you to grow and it's part of life itself. And this is fundamentally a thing that separates Nietzsche from everybody else, is because we always like to think that a good life, a great life, is a life devoid of pain. And Nietzsche fundamentally rejects that. He thinks pain is an integral part of life, and not just integral, but also in a way, pain is beautiful. And I think this is also why every lifter, every athlete, every person in self-improvement needs to read Nietzsche, because I think a lot of times people try to go into self-improvement simply to try to, go through pain now so you can just live pleasurably later. That's something that Nietzsche would fundamentally reject. And this is something that I found in my own life too. I think pain and pleasure are equally valid, equally important, equally a part of life. And to put one over the other, it's kind of fucked up in a way. This is the way that I like to view it. I was taking this cold shower. I made a video about this, I think like a month or two ago. I was taking this cold shower and I just fucking hated it. I was like, man, it's so painful. I fucking hate it. And then at this one point, I had this sort of realization. I was like, wow, this pain that I'm feeling, this misery, this suffering, I have always demonized it. I've always ran away from it. I would only embrace it from the standpoint of saying, I'll go through this pain now so I don't have to face pain later. But in reality, that's the wrong way to look at it, because this pain allows you to grow, not just grow for the sake of pleasure. And that's it. Like the hot water, it's not just to make the hot water feel better. Pain is valid in and of itself. And that's just a fundamentally different way of viewing things, because it's fucking scary. And this is why Nietzsche was like, again, the most radically honest human being of all time. And I almost had this sort of like breakdown in the shower. I know it sounds so dramatic, but I just realized I was like, damn, like I have demonized pain and suffering all of my life. When in reality, this pain and suffering was there to help me grow as a person. It cares about me. It's kind of like when you're a kid, you have two parents. Hopefully, you lived in a two-parent household. If not, you know, that's kind of a modern symptom of decadence and the modern age and after God has died. Um, but let's say that you had two different parents, you know, one, usually the mother, is going to be way more caring, kind of isn't very strict on you, more warm, loving, sort of like hot water, as opposed to the father, who's a lot more strict and will inflict pain on you and suffering on you in order to help you grow. That's kind of like cold water. But can you really say that your mom loves you more than your dad, even though the way in which they show their love is different? Something to think about. And so when I kind of made that connection there, I was like, fuck, you know, pain, suffering, meaningful suffering. It's stupid of me to just demonize it. It would be wrong for me to demonize it the same way I'd be wrong for me to demonize my dad when he was younger for being hard on me because he cares about me. He wants me to grow. Similar to my mom, right? My mom was the different, she always said yes to everything that I said. It wasn't very strict. And my dad had to be like come in and be the strict one. But she still loved me equally too. It's just different forms of love. And it would be wrong of me to demonize either form of love. One is more pain and suffering. One is more just pleasure, I guess. But both are equally valid. Both are equally a part of life. And so this idea here, eternal recurrence, which I'll get to in a second, that's a yes saying to life, where you say yes to all of life's struggles, all of life's struggles, all of life's pleasures, good and bad, so much to the point. This is a scary thought experiment I'm about to share with you guys. All right. This thought experiment, it freaks most people out, but it will really give you a perspective on whether you like life or not. Because again, pain, suffering, pleasure, all equally valid in Nietzsche's eyes. Pain isn't good just for the sake of delaying pleasure. Pain and suffering helps you grow as a person. And again, like I said at the beginning, that's the central thing that Nietzsche cares about is helping his reader grow as a person to help pave the way for the Ubermensch. All right. Here's what eternal recurrence is. It's a thought experiment that he introduces in Thus Spoke Zarathustra in the third book, I believe. And then he talks about it in subsequent works. That's where he first introduced it. The basic idea is this. If a demon comes to you and says, let me restart. Sorry. If a demon comes to you at night and says, hey, this is what life is. Life is you repeating your life over and over again for eternity. If you repeat your life over and over again for eternity, how would that make you feel? All of the good things, all the bad things, all the suffering, all the heartaches. So this thought experiment, the demon comes to Zarathustra at night in a dream, from what I remember, and says, yeah, this is what life is. You repeat it over and over again for eternity. And then this is a determinant of whether you actually like life or not. Would you just break down and just like be like, oh no, it's terrible? Or would you start worshiping the demon and be so thankful? Be like, yes, I want to live my life over and over and over again for eternity. All the good things, all the bad things. That is a true yes saying to life, where you truly love life enough to the point where all the bad things, all the good things that happen, all the terrible things that happen, it doesn't matter. You love life so much that you're willing to live it forever and ever and ever and ever. Because one thing that Nietzsche was very against was otherworldliness. He actually called this is where I'm going to piss some Christians off. He actually called Christianity Platonism for the masses. So Plato was famous for this. Well, he's famous for a lot. He's basically like, there's this famous quote that's saying that Plato was all of Western philosophy are footnotes to Plato, which, you know, they might have a point, whoever said that. But he was very famous for something called the world of forms, where he basically thought that everything in this world wasn't real, and then they were imperfect representations of this other world where everything is perfect. So, for example, in the world of forms, there's like a perfect, there's a perfect coffee cup, right? And this is a crude imitation of the perfect coffee cup. And there's sort of gradations, I guess, of the value of those imitations, but it's not the perfect coffee cup. That makes sense. So it basically helped create the idea of heaven, where there's this like perfect world that you go to after you die. And so that's why Nietzsche believed that Christianity was Platonism for the masses, right? Say, oh, once you die and once you're done with their suffering and stuff on earth, it's okay that life sucked here. Doesn't matter. It's okay. Life is going to be great up there in heaven. Nietzsche was very against that. He said, you know what? Like, he didn't even make a claim of whether he thought heaven existed or not. I mean, he thought the Christian representation was kind of cope, but he was just like, I don't care about that. I care about this life. What can I do in this life? And he just believed that so many people were like looking up to the sky, looking for answers for their suffering, when they should just be focusing on their life here. Funny enough, another Christian philosopher, although he's more of an author, but he's definitely a philosopher too, Dostoevsky, kind of has a similar worldview with that, except he didn't necessarily, that worldview doesn't preclude a belief in God in Christianity. That kind of goes more into existential beliefs and stuff, which we're not going to cover too much here today. Again, these guys, they're so rich with their thoughts and everything. I could talk about this for fucking hundreds of hours. And yes, I will be covering Dostoevsky in the future as well, because he's just, Nietzsche actually said, even though funny enough, Nietzsche and him, they both lived at the same time. Dostoevsky was famous during his time, so he didn't know who Nietzsche was. But Nietzsche, because again, Nietzsche was pretty obscure. He didn't become famous until after he died, or after he became crazy, rather. But Nietzsche knew who Dostoevsky was. And Nietzsche said of Dostoevsky that he's the only, he called him a psychologist, he's the only other psychologist he's ever read that was worth reading during his time. And Nietzsche, as critical as he is of everybody, that's like the biggest compliment ever. And it's funny because Nietzsche and Dostoevsky's thoughts were kind of antithetical to one another. Nietzsche believed everything was basically about power. And Dostoevsky kind of believed that everything was, I'm not as much of an expert in Dostoevsky. I've started to get into him, but he kind of believed that everything's about love, right? And love of humanity, love of people, unconditional love. But yeah, funny enough, there's actually a lot of similarities between the two, but the central reasoning behind how they get to their conclusions is a little bit different. But anyway, that's for another thing. See, I'm already all over the place with this. I apologize. It's just that, like, it's kind of like, I'm going to piss off the Christians in my audience, okay? It's kind of like, honestly, trying to describe the Bible in one presentation. You just can't fucking do it. You know? It's like, I'm trying my best. So that's why I'm trying, again, to try to put all these concepts more specifically into self-improvement. Because otherwise, if I was trying to tackle everything, it would just be impossible. I already probably confused a bunch of you, but I hope some of the things that I said make sense and rings true in some way or another. All right. So let me look at the chat. And then speaking of coffee, that kind of made me have to piss. So I wanted to see what you guys have to say. And then we'll go from there. Let's see. Aren't you not accepting life by choosing to live it over and over and not accepting death, or is death repeated as well? So I believe from Nietzsche's perspective, death is repeated as well, right? So let's say, for example, that you have like a horrific death. let's say you die a slow death of cancer for like the last 5 years of your life, you should still be like, well, I'm going to live that over and over again. Put it on repeat again, baby. Let's do it. Yeah. So actually, there's maybe I can find it in here. Probably not, but it's kind of a thing that he says of like, yes, like you should be the type of person to be like, again, life, do it again, let's go. And I think the idea too of eternal recurrence is also interesting because once you read it, it makes you, it's almost like a good sort of like a pragmatic way to view the world of saying, oh, I better live my life as if I'm going to have to live this forever and ever. So I better make my life fucking good. You know, I better make it worth living. I better make it meaningful. Imagine that because that's true hell, right? True hell is living a meaningless life over and over and over again. This is another concept that Nietzsche has. Again, he's the most rich philosopher in his thinking. Again, I'm biased, but he believes that suffering, for example, is not only something that humans don't avoid or they actually crave it as long as there's a meaning tied to it. And this is one of his critiques of Christianity, for example, is that he calls it in the genealogy of morals. He has a whole section called "What is the meaning of ascetic ideals?" Asceticism is basically just you being like forcing discipline upon yourself. And he believed that, for example, Christianity, monks who would live these very strict disciplined lifestyles, not only do they not hate it, they actually secretly enjoy it because they find deep meaning in it. But yeah, that's for a whole other thing. But anyway, that just goes to show, okay, the effectiveness of having a meaningful life. So when I look at something like eternal recurrence, it's kind of a way for you to accept your past, as well as making sure that you structure your life so that you live meaningfully to the point where you constantly have that feeling of fulfillment, that you're just willing to live it over and over again, despite whatever pains and stuff you go through. It's very fascinating stuff. Very fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to bring this back up, and I have to piss really quickly, and then I will come back. We have more slides than this. Don't worry. We have this of like, who I kind of already went through this. What is the Ubermensch? I kind of already went through that too. I'm going to explain this part because I think if I explain sort of his prologue, you get a better sort of understanding of what Nietzsche is all about. Because I think his prologue kind of explains, in a way, it's the TLDR of his whole philosophy. It's one giant metaphor, but I'm going to explain what that metaphor is after I take a piss. I'll be right back. Not very Ubermensch of me to have a strong enough bladder, but like I said, hey, I'm not the Ubermensch. I'm one of the higher men that paved the way for the Ubermensch, and you guys viewing are too. Because like I said before, if you weren't, then you would have tuned out by now because I'm not roasting fresh and fit. All right, I'll be right back. Oh my God, that feels so much better. Speaking of eternal recurrence, bro, that feeling when you're holding in a piss and then you finally just release it. If I could replay that feeling over and over again for eternity, I'll be a happy man. No better feeling. Yeah, well, as soon as I like, if I just change the stream to being like, you guys want to guess what Fresh and Fit did next. Oh my god. Um, yeah, the viewership will increase 100-fold, or maybe not 100-fold, but probably tenfold. I probably have like, I've actually done a Fresh and Fit stream talking about them where I had 900 live viewers. Isn't that crazy? Again, everybody has that slave morality within us, that sort of herd mentality. Um, Even the best of us, right? So just because you like drama, I like drama too, which is why I cover it. But should that be everything? Or is that all that's there? I always still try to tie the drama to um more meaningful things. Okay. Like, oh, well, this is stupid. This is what you should do instead. And that's kind of what I try to do, because only some people operate off of higher morality or master morality. I believe you guys here, or else you wouldn't be watching this. But everybody has slave morality and everybody has herd morality within them. Every single one of us. I do. All of you guys do too. It's just part of the human condition. But that's sort of one of the things that I try to do with the Fresh and Fit thing of always covering them. And then now I probably have to cover more drama type stuff to do this, where you cast a very wide net, because everybody appeals to herd morality, slave morality. And then hopefully some people will stay for this type of shit that actually matters. One of my clients said it well. I didn't know he eventually became a client of mine. He was just a YouTube commenter once. He said, "I came for the drama. I stayed for the philosophy." And that's exactly it. For those of you guys who want to create content someday, want to become a YouTuber, whatever, you have to keep that in mind. Sort of the idea that every single person has slave morality, herd morality within them, that sheep mentality. Only some people have that sort of higher thinking, that individualistic thinking, going against the grain, having the courage to do that. But even among those people, they still have that herd morality, slave morality type feeling within. So in order for you to, and it's still very powerful. Your proclivity to cope, for example, right, to make excuses, that's slave morality. I'd have to cover a whole different stream uh, based on that. Basically, master morality, slave morality. The whole idea is, and this is encompassed in his work, The Genealogy of Mortals, which I will talk about at the end here, and I think is a good place to start with Nietzsche, by the way, for those of you guys who want to like crack into his works. Basically, there were the masters who kind of made valuations of what's good or bad. They said, oh, we're good because we're like strong and capable and smart, and everybody who isn't us is bad and stupid. And then Christianity, more specifically Judaism, actually, sort of kind of flipped that on its head and said, no, actually, you bad people, or you good people, you noblemen, are actually not just bad, you're evil. And us, who you call bad, are good. So it's kind of just a massive cope. So Nietzsche's whole idea is we have both those slave and master moralities within us, of you just wanting to dominate and do whatever you want, is always in conflict with you coping and not being able to do what you want. And he sort of the symptom of that, what he is something he calls ressentiment, which is like the French for resentment, but it's a little bit different in the standpoint of ressentiment. It's more specifically like you resent somebody because somebody else prevents you from doing something. So it's like resentment mixed with envy. It's a very ugly emotion. So that's the sort of the origin of slave morality, I guess. So anyway, let's just to, again, all these things. I hope it. I'm going to keep saying this. I hope it makes sense. It's just hard to articulate somebody whose philosophy is just so rich, and honestly, it's hard to really interpret somebody who's like way smarter than me. You know, it's just hard to like put all of what they have to say into words, because this guy literally probably had like a 300 IQ. And on top of that, he was wise and just yeah. But I'm trying my best. So I, like I said over here, the attempters, right? The philosophers of the future that he writes for, the higher men who are more specifically the philosophers of the future, the attempters. I'm attempting to do this. Actually, this leads me into the prologue of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. There's one very important thing that happened. Um, Now I can read this part out. I hope it's not a bore. I don't think it's a bore, just the way that he writes, but it's going to be me. I think the best way for me to explain it is to actually read it. If you guys are cool with that, I'll read it. If you'd rather me just sort of try to explain it, then I can. But basically, if I was to read this in order for it to make sense, I'd have to be reading one. Hold on, one, two. I'd have to basically read like 10 pages. I'm sure. Do you guys want that or no? Because if you don't want that, I totally understand. I'll try to give you like the TLDR. Do an interpretive dance of the texts. Do the Ubermensch dance, baby. That's got to be like a new TikTok thing. The Ubermensch dance. One of you guys have to come up with it. I'm just going to read it, all right? Because again, it'll only make sense if I read it. And for those of you who, especially who watch the replay here, then you can just skip ahead if you want. I love listening to reading. Reminds me of elementary school. Okay, there we go. Class is in session now, kids. Gather round and I will tell you the story of Zarathustra coming down from the mountain. All right, I'm gonna try to make it entertaining as much as I can. So I'm just gonna read it. All right, so here we go. I'm not gonna read the entire prologue. I'm gonna start from section 3. Okay, so here's a little bit of TLDR what happened in the beginning. He's in a mountain and he was there for a while, and then he just kind of so he left the mountain when he was 30 years old. And he spent a lot of time in the mountains, and then he came down and said, "Hey, God is dead." And then he just said that to some random old man, and then he went into a town. Okay, so that's sort of the setting. Now I'm going to go to it from there. If you've read it before, you should be able to pull out key quotes with grander extrapolations. Yeah, but you can't really do it justice if it's already written really well. And like I said, his stuff is so rich that I'm not going to sit here and act like I've fully understood him. I don't think anybody can fully understand Nietzsche. Nietzsche can't even fully understand himself. But anyway, let me just read, okay? So here we go. When Zarathustra came into the next town, which lies on the edge of the forest, he found many people gathered together in the marketplace, for it had been promised that there would be a tightrope walker. Remember this tightrope walker. It's central to the story, the tightrope walker, okay? And Zarathustra spoke thus to the people. I teach you, the Ubermensch, man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beast rather than overcome man? What is the ape to man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. And man shall be just that for the Ubermensch, a laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. So basically what he's saying there is, he's going to get to it in a second. He's going to explain, but the Ubermensch, the overman, is basically the next evolution of man, similar to how we evolved from apes. And this is around the time that evolution, became like an actual plausible theory back then. So, apes to humans, the way that the human views the ape, the next evolution of man, the Ubermensch, is going to view humans that way. You have made your way home from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even now too, man is more ape than any ape. Whoever is the wisest among you is also a mere conflict and cross between plant and ghost. But do I bid you become ghosts or plants? Behold, I teach you. The translation here is the overman, but we all kind of know what the Ubermensch is, so I'm going to say the Ubermensch. Behold, I teach you the Ubermensch. The Ubermensch is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say the Ubermensch shall be the meaning of the earth. I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth, and do not believe those who speak to you of otherworldly hopes. So again, what I talked about before, he doesn't like people thinking of like a platonic world of saying like, oh, I'm just gonna cope through life and eventually I'm gonna go to heaven where things are gonna be okay. Right? He's totally against that idea. Um, let's see here. Poison mixers are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying and poisoned themselves, of whom the earth is weary. So let them go. Once the sin against God was the greatest sin, but God died, and these sinners died with him. To sin against the earth is now the most dreadful thing, and to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meat. Sorry. And to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. Once the soul looked contemptuously upon the body, and then this contempt was the highest. She wanted the body meager, ghastly, and starved. Thus she hoped to escape it and the earth. Oh, this soul herself was still meager, ghastly, and starved, and cruelty was the lust of this soul. But you too, my brothers, tell me, what does your body proclaim of your soul? Is not your soul poverty and filth and wretched contentment? So he was very against again like the idea of a soul too. He said, and he even says this before, he considers himself to be very spiritual, but he doesn't think the spirituality is something that's like not of this world. He believes the spirit is part of the body, right? So he's trying to make very much being like, stop thinking otherworldly stuff, bring it down to earth. Verily, a polluted stream is man. One must be a sea to be able to receive a polluted stream without becoming unclean. So this is kind of one of the things that he's talking about with the Ubermensch, right? The Ubermensch is somebody who is like so grand that like what he believes is like the flaws of man just aren't going to affect him. Behold, I teach you the overman. He is the sea. Oh yeah, well there you go. In him, your great contempt can go under. What is the greatest experience you can have? It is the hour of the great contempt, the hour in which your happiness too arouses your disgust and even your reason and your virtue. The hour when you say, what matters my happiness? Let me repeat that again. The hour when you say, what matters my happiness? It is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. But my happiness ought to justify existence itself. The hour when you say, what matters my reason? Does it crave knowledge as the lion his food? It is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. The hour when you say, what matters my virtue? As yet it has not made me rage. How weary I am of my goodwill and my evil. How weary I am of my good and my evil. That's kind of sort of a prelude to his, what in my opinion is magnum opus, that he says, he kind of explains things more in plain words rather than just in metaphors and stories, beyond good and evil. All that poverty and filth and wretched contentment. The hour when you say, what matters my justice? I do not see that I am flames and fuel, but the just are flames and fuel. The hour when you say, what matters my pity? Is not pity the cross on which he is nailed who loves man? But my pity is no crucifixion. How you yet spoken thus? Have you yet cried thus? Oh, that I might have heard you cry thus. Not your sin, but your thrift cries to heaven. Your meanness, even in your sin, cries to heaven. Okay, so the rest of it, I'm going to try to skip through here because there's a okay, so this is important. Okay, Zarathustra, however, beheld the people and was amazed. Then he spoke thus: man is a rope tied. This is very important, right? This is central to all of Nietzsche's philosophy, and I'm going to explain in a second what he means here. Man, again, remember, there's a tightrope walker, right? Okay, the tightrope walker is very, very important to keep in mind here. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous across, a dangerous on the way, a dangerous looking back, a dangerous shuddering and stopping. What is great in man God, I can't speak. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. What can be loved in man is that he is an overture and a going under. I love those who do. This is very important. Again, I'm going to say that a lot, right? I love those who do. God damn it, I can't speak today. I love those who do not know how to live except by going under. For those are for they are those who cross over. So kind of what he's saying there again. Imagine that there's these, let me so you guys can see. Imagine there's beast and then there's the Ubermensch. And man is a tightrope walker who's going between those two. I keep smacking my my mic. Okay. So man itself, you, myself, everybody are the ones going those two. And in Nietzsche's opinion, what makes a man valuable is an attempter, somebody who's attempting to cross from beast to Ubermensch. It's a very perilous journey. And you're going to see in a second, why it's perilous. But that is what's valuable in man, is the attempt of going from beast to Ubermensch, the striving, right? It's not necessarily being the Ubermensch itself, because that's literally like impossible. He does believe that there will be one day, but like none of us are going to get it. But what makes a man admirable is the attempt. If you guys saw my video on Hamza, I think Hamza gets so many fucking things wrong, a lot. But I still think he's an admirable human being because he's going out there and trying, right? He's trying to become great, and he's encouraging his followers to become great. Is he going to fail and fall in the process? Yeah, but who doesn't, right? Just because, for myself, for example, right? Just because I think that I'm further along than Hamza is, or that I know a little bit more about this stuff than him, I still will probably fall and not reach Ubermensch status. So what's admirable about men then? Is it how far they're able to go from beast to Ubermensch? Or is it the fact that he has the balls to actually try it at all? And keep in mind, when he's in the town here, I'll talk about in a second, there's a crowd of people around, like watching the tightrope walker about to walk over. So that's the vast majority. That's the herd, right? And you're going to see in a second how the herd acts with with Zarathustra talking about this stuff in the first place. Where did I go? Okay. So let me just read everything he said here. I love those who don't, again, this is important. I love those who do not know how to live except by going under, for they are those who cross over. Right? Again, that's the higher men, the people who are making the attempt. I love the great despisers because they are the great reverers and arrows of longing for the other shore. I love those. Man, should I explain each line here? No, I can't do that. I'm just going to explain that one really quickly too. Again, remember, when he says the great despisers, he believes that any man who was a great man was always sort of the bad conscience of his day because he went against the grain. But he did that because he has a fundamental love of humanity and a love of life, where he's like, hey, us human beings, we can do better. We can evolve. We can try to go for the Ubermensch, as opposed to most people, they just want to sit there and be complacent because they don't want to step outside of their comfort. Okay, I'm going to try to refrain from explaining each line because it's just like there's so much depth with everything he says here. And again, a lot of this stuff, you don't understand it just from first reading. The reason that I understand what he's saying here is because he explains it in more plain English, or plain German for that matter, in subsequent works. So Beyond Good and Evil, Genealogy of Morals, he uses those two especially to explain Zarathustra. Let's see here. I love those who do not first seek behind the stars for a reason to go under and be a sacrifice, but who sacrifice themselves for the earth, that the earth may someday become the overman's. Again, he believes that the higher men, the philosophers of the future, us, we are paving the way for the Ubermensch. So Ubermensch, Overman, same thing. Overman is the English translation of Ubermensch. I love him who lives to know and who wants to know, so that the Ubermensch may live someday, and thus he wants to go under. I love him who works and invents to build a house for the Ubermensch and to prepare earth, animal, and plant for him, for thus he wants to go under. I love him who loves his virtue, for virtue is the will to go under and an arrow of longing. I love him who does not hold back one drop of spirit for himself, but wants to be entirely the spirit of his virtue. Thus he strides over the bridge as spirit. I love him who makes his virtue his addiction and his catastrophe. For his virtue's sake, he wants to live on and to live no longer. I could totally relate to that statement. Where basically, like, your sort of obsession with the truth and your obsession to try to become better and stronger and try to discover life, sometimes it it backfires. It backfires hard. And a lot of people say like that's like it's irrational in a way, right? You're almost like you're so obsessed with trying to seek the truth and become better that it comes at your own expense sometimes. And sometimes it can be catastrophic, whether that be financially. Sometimes people just like fucking die in an attempt to like, or they go suicidal and shit. Um, and this is something, you know, I brought this up a little bit earlier, right here. Let me see. Nietzsche's going to make way more sense the more life that you live, and honestly, the more suffering that you go through. I know that sounds really intense, but it's true. So right here, right, attempters who write in blood. They write in blood because them trying to attempt to pave the way for the Ubermensch, they suffer through a lot. But despite that suffering, they still welcome it because they know that that's their life's purpose. And the fire within them to try to like do what they got to do, it's so strong in them that even if other people say that it's irrational, even if other people say that it's stupid, they don't care because they know that's what they're put on this earth to do. They know that that's what they're meant to do. So people who obsess over self-improvement, I'm sure like a lot of you guys who are watching now, you can't really explain it, right? You can't explain why these things matter to you. You can try to articulate it, but you explain it to most people and be like, "That's stupid. Why don't you just like try to get a wife and kids and like why don't you just live normally?" Because that goes against my very nature. I know that's for you. I know that's for most people, but it's not for me. It's not why I'm put on this earth. I'm put on this earth to attempt something crazy, and I'm probably going to die in the process. Metaphorically die, not like physically die. Hopefully not. And I think this is sort of the plight of an artist, for example. You know, these people, they're so driven by their art that they're willing to go into poverty and everything. And other people around them are just like, this makes no sense. What the fuck are you doing? Why don't you get a job? Why don't you like, make a bunch of money and right? Some valid critique because you don't want to be a burden to society. You don't want to be a burden to other people in your pursuit of the truth. So that's more from a practical standpoint where you're not ruining other people's lives. Like you don't want to just be like the permanently the guy in his mom's basement, like saying, "Oh, I'm just an artist." It's like, well, you gotta, you gotta, yeah, you gotta contribute somehow, right? You have to live more than that. But he's kind of epitomizing like the struggling artist, for example, right here. All right. So yeah, let me continue here. I love him who does not want to have too many virtues. One virtue is more virtue than two because it is more of a noose on which his catastrophe may hang. Again, I'm not even going to explain that. There's just too much there. I love him whose soul squanders itself, who wants no thanks and returns none, for he always gives away and does not want to preserve himself. Again, every line that he says here is just I could make a whole video on each line, but okay. I love him who is abashed when the dice fall to make his fortune and asks, quote, "Am I then a crooked gambler?" unquote, for he wants to perish. I love him who casts golden words before his deeds and always does even more than he promises, for he wants to go under. I love him who justifies future and redeems past generations, for he wants to perish of the present. I love him who I love him who chastens his God because he loves his God, for he must perish of the wrath of his God. That one's even a bit confusing to me, to be honest. Again, guys, I'm not going to act like I have 100% Nietzsche figured out, but I'm trying. I have I'm further along the line than most people, I'll say, and enough to share my love of him and try to share it with you guys so that you can find value from his works too. I love him whose soul is deep even in being wounded, and who can perish of a small experience. Thus he goes gladly over the bridge. I love him whose soul is overfull, so that he forgets himself, and all things are in him. Thus all things spell his going under. I love him who has a free spirit and a free heart. Thus his head is only the entrails of his heart, but his heart drives him to go under. So basically, people who are extremely passionate to the point of rationality. Kind of. I mean, that's my interpretation of it. I love all those who are as heavy drops, falling one by one out of the dark cloud that hangs over men. They herald the advent of lightning, and as heralds, they perish. Behold, I am the herald of lightning. Behold, I am the herald of the lightning, and a heavy drop from the cloud. But this lightning is called the Übermensch. Now, okay, so this is the the next part. This is the important part where, again, he's speaking to a crowd of people. So imagine, this crazy guy coming down from the mountains, and they're in a town square because they're about to see this guy walk over a wire, and this guy's just sitting there just saying all these things, right? Okay, so let's just keep that context in mind. When Zarathustra had spoken these words, he beheld the people again and was silent. There they stand, he said to his heart. There they laugh. They do not understand me. I am not the mouth for these ears. Must one smash their ears before they learn to listen with their eyes? Must one clatter like kettle drums and preachers of repentance? Or do they believe only the stammerer? So again, that's him sort of saying, okay, well, only some people are going to sort of understand what I'm saying. And again, he speaks so kind of cryptically in a way, and sometimes it's hard for you to understand, but it's more so if you understand the concepts, right? Some people those concepts just won't relate to them at all. They're just like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is stupid, whatever, So he says that, the common man, the sheep, will kind of look at him from that perspective. And by definition, most people are going to be sheep. So he's basically saying, well, none of these people, or very few of them, are going to be able to relate to what I'm even saying. So anyway, he continues. They have something of which they are proud. What do they call that which makes them proud? Education, they call it. It distinguishes them from goat herds. So, for example, what am I doing here? I don't have a formal training in philosophy. I don't. And Nietzsche actually very much chastises people who oh, well, you shouldn't be talking about these concepts because you didn't study philosophy in college and get a degree in it. Nietzsche himself taught philology, but he was a professor at a University of Basel. And he left because he thought it was fucking stupid. It's like, oh, we're just sitting here jerking each other, circle jerking each other off to what the meaning of life is supposed to be without actually going out there and fucking living it, And so I've had people like that. They're just like, oh, well, why should you talk about these concepts? Where is your degree? Nietzsche specifically thinks if you actually, the vast majority of people who get philosophy degrees nowadays, Nietzsche would be like, you're fucking stupid for doing that. He literally has a name for them. He talks about them in Beyond Good and Evil. He calls them philosophical laborers. He says you're not an actual real philosopher if that's what you're doing. If that's your measure of somebody being a philosopher or not. His philosopher of the future, his attempters, are people like you and I who discover this and they're gripped by it, and you live your philosophy through your life. Not through reading a bunch of texts and that's it. Of course, we're doing that right now, but with the purpose of trying to implement it into our own lives rather than just sitting there LARPing around and talking about it. Right? That's why I have a huge emphasis on action on this channel, not just talking about these philosophical concepts, but actually putting them into action. Right? So you are a true philosopher if you take these concepts and try to apply them to your own life. You are a philosophical laborer, which is a fake philosopher in Nietzsche's opinion and in mine, if you just sit there and study philosophy all day without actually putting it into practice, and which is the vast majority of people who study philosophy, unfortunately, especially in colleges. So that's literally him saying there. It's so funny. I'm just imagining, people in their philosophy class reading that, and they're just like, oh shit, I'm called out. Now, that said, do I think philosophy departments and stuff are complete horseshit? Of course not, right? Because there's a lot to be said there. And if you're in philosophy now, I'm not shitting on you necessarily, but don't think that what makes you a philosopher, what makes you, in Nietzsche's eyes, is just your degree and reading about this stuff. What makes you a philosopher is an attempter who writes in his own blood. Somebody who is daring enough to make, to go on that tightrope between beast and overman and make that attempt to go across. That is what makes you a philosopher. That is what makes you a higher man. That is what makes you an admirable human being who is paving the way for the Ubermensch. So, for example, somebody like Hamza, right? He doesn't have any background in philosophy. He probably doesn't know the first thing about Nietzsche, any of the Socratics, any of that shit. He probably knows none of that. But he's more of a philosopher than the vast majority of people who study philosophy because he's attempting, because he's trying. Same thing with Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate's definitely the bad conscience of his day. And I have a lot of disagreements and stuff, but at the very least, he has the courage to try to like do things. Now, it might be all for selfish purposes and not for the betterment of humanity. That's what would differentiate him between being, a higher man, but or an attempter, I should say. But if we assume the best of intentions, which might be saying a lot, then technically he's more of a philosopher because the things he talks about is through his lived experiences, right? Through being a kickboxer, through doing morally questionable things like his cam girl business to make a lot of money, whatever, right? But technically Nietzsche would consider him more of a philosopher than people who just sit there and read books about philosophy in fucking school. Okay. Anyway, continuing. That is why they do not like to hear the word contempt applied to them. Let me then address their pride. Let me speak for them what is most contemptible, but that is the last man. And this is the last man that I talked about a while ago. Remember, the last man is that I want you to think of the last man and think of the typical black pillar. All right. Not the typical black pill, the black pill mindset, the complaining, all that type of shit, especially the incels. When he talks about the last man, think of that. And thus spoke Zarathustra to the people. Oh, wait, maybe he... Okay, yeah, he's going to talk about it in a second. And thus spoke Zarathustra to the people. Again, remember the last man, black pillars, okay? Make that association in your mind. It's very important. The time has come for man to set himself a goal. The time has come for man to plant the seed of his highest hope. His soil is still rich enough, but one day this soil will be poor and domesticated, and no tall tree will be able to grow in it. Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer shoot the arrow of his longing beyond man, and the string of his bow will have forgotten how to whir. I say unto you, one must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star. Woo! That's a deep one. Somebody who explores the idea of chaos a lot is Jordan Peterson. But then also this is kind of akin to Carl Jung and the shadow, right? The shadow is the repressed things that we have in our unconscious that's very chaotic, but we need to integrate the shadow in order to become great. I'll cover that in a later thing. I say unto you, you still have chaos in yourselves. Alas, the time is coming when man will no longer give birth to a star. Alas, the time of the most despicable man is coming. He that is no longer able to despise himself. Behold, I show you the last man. What is love? What is creation? What is longing? What is a star? Thus asked the last man, and he blinks. The earth has become small, and on it hops the last man, who makes everything small. His race is as ineradicable and as the flea beetle. The last man lives longest. We have invented happiness, says the last man, and they blink. They have left the regions where it was hard to live, for one needs warmth. One still loves one's neighbor and rubs against him, for one needs warmth. Becoming sick and harboring suspicion are sinful to them. One proceeds carefully. A fool, whoever still stumbles over stones or human beings. A little poison now and then that makes for agreeable dreams, and much poison in the end for an agreeable death. One still works, for work is a form of entertainment, but one is careful lest the entertainment be too harrowing. One no longer becomes poor or rich, both require too much exertion. Who still wants to rule? Who obey? Both require too much exertion. No shepherd and one herd. Everybody wants the same. Everybody is the same. Whoever feels different goes voluntarily into the madhouse. Formerly, all the world was mad, say the most refined, and they blink. One is clever and knows everything that has ever happened. So there is no end of derision. One still quarrels, but one is soon reconciled, else it might spoil the digestion. One has one's little pleasure for the day and one's little pleasure for the night, but one has a regard for health. We have invented happiness, say the last men, and they blink. Okay, so there's a lot to uncover there. So basically what he's saying is he has this idea, and he talks about this in a later work. I believe it was the Twilight of the Idols, which is actually one of his shorter works. But yeah, he's basically saying he's looking into the future after the death of God and society becoming more and more technologically advanced to the point where we can get to the point where like we're super comfortable. I talked about this early in the stream. You could literally live a life where you never leave your apartment and you could still jerk off to porn and not interact with women or do anything, right? You basically just rot. Right? Your spirit decays, but you're so addicted to comfort that like you're stuck there like glue. And that's something that he's very scared of. And he's basically somebody who is living that life of comfort. Again, he believes that life is not just pleasure, because he thinks pleasure is great too, but also pain. But people who are completely kind of eschewing pain and saying like, oh, fuck you, pain, I only want pleasure and just be comfortable. That is when the human spirit, that is when man dies. That's the worst possible scenario to happen for men. And the Ubermensch and the higher men going across from beast to man. I'm sorry, beast to Ubermensch. Those are the people who are willing to go across despite the fact that they can live a life of comfort. And that's what's required to save humanity. Because the path that humanity is on now, and Nietzsche is correct about this, there's a bunch of last men now. Bunch of black pillars. They can just sit there, LARP, and complain online about how their life sucks, but in reality, they're actually very comfortable with their lives. They love their lives. Well, they don't love it. They actually hate it because there's no meaning in it. But they're so weak and they're so addicted to comfort that they can't leave. And then they start spreading that around like a cancer. Oh, we're all sheep. We're all equally valid. That's another. That's also a warning for moral relativism. There's no sheep. Just I'm sorry. We're all sheep. There's no sheep herder. The sheep herder in this instance, one could deduce, should be the Ubermensch, right? Somebody required to come in and save humanity. Where was I? Okay, so yeah, let's continue here. I guess he actually didn't. And here ended Zarathustra's first speech, which is also called the prologue. For at this point, he was interrupted by the clamor and delight of the crowd. And remember, the crowd is a bunch of sheep, right? So when they're saying this here, they're being they're kind of making fun of Zarathustra. Again, sheep are going to rebel against this stuff, right? The people who if we're putting this in like manosphere terms, or the people who spoke out against Fresh and Fit, the people who speak out against Andrew Tate, for example. Again, I think Andrew Tate's way less worse than Fresh and Fit. When you're critical of these people, the sheep just rebel. Give us this last man, O Zarathustra, they shouted, turn us into these last men. Then we shall make you a gift of the Ubermensch. And all the people jubilated and clucked with their tongues. So this is something that Nietzsche is afraid of, is the sheep. Most people will be like, that sounds great. A life of comfort, a life of just, there's nothing, there's no values that we have to follow. Everybody's sense of morality is equally valid. Where we could just do whatever we want and not and just be comfortable and live pleasurable lives. That sounds amazing. Give us that, please. Your overmen sound stupid. But again, if we agree that life, what gives life meaning isn't just the pleasure, but then also the pain as well and the suffering, then that actually isn't something that you should crave, because it'll come at the expense of your sense of meaning. And your sense of meaning, this isn't, Nietzsche didn't talk about this way too much, but people like Viktor Frankl, for example, people like Dostoevsky, well, actually, in a way, Nietzsche too, they all believed that, Viktor Frankl, more specifically, Man's Search for Meaning, he believed that the will to meaning is the primary driver of humanity, of humans. And I believe that to be the case as well. And in a way, Nietzsche does too, because like I said, in another work of his, he says, man actually welcomes suffering, provided he has a meaning for it. The implication there being that meaning transcends suffering, right? And you could make an argument that suffering is required for true meaning, which, based on my own life, I think that's definitely the case, and maybe for some of you guys as well. Okay, so here we go. But Zarathustra became sad and said to his heart, they do not understand me. I am not the mouth for these ears. I seem to have lived too long in the mountains. I listened too much to brooks and trees. Now I talk to them as to goat herds. My soul is unmoved and bright as the mountains in the morning. But they think I am cold, and I jeer and make dreadful jests. And now they look at me and laugh. And as they laugh, they even hate me. There is ice in their laughter. When you try to encourage people to go through self-improvement and encourage people to not live lives of comfort, not to project their problems on other people, blame other people, but bring the blame back to themselves and try to become better, invite suffering into your life so you can find meaning, people are going to rebel. People are going to resist. That I could say that for the case with me all the time. People, especially when I'm like very critical of the black pillars or very critical of the red pillars or very critical of MGTOW, people are like, oh, you're so heartless. How dare you? But in reality, what I'm trying to do, and again, because you can't speak to everybody at once, man. And that's something that I've decided for myself with this channel. I'm not going to influence the herd. I'm just not. There's no way. You're just speaking two different languages. So those types of people, they're automatically going to demonize you, because somebody with a self-improvement, a growth mindset, who takes personal responsibility, will see when I'm critical of the MGTOW guys, the black pill guys, the incels. In a way, I actually do care about them. It's kind of, this is why I make a distinction between the mommy manosphere and the father manosphere. The father manosphere, they again, the motherly type instinct is not necessarily bad in and of itself, but the vast majority of guys, when we live in a decadent society, it's mostly, motherly, feminine type energy, right? So the Fresh and Fit fans, especially, and the Rolo fans, they have too much feminine energy. They have too much of a feminine mommy mindset. And so Rolo Tomasi, Fresh and Fit, those types of guys, they take advantage of that. And for all we know, they think that they're being like charitable and nice to their followers, but that's exactly the problem. Life has been too nice to them, to the point where they have become weak. They need more hardship in their lives. And so people like Rolo, people like Fresh and Fit, they'll appeal to the slave morality of the person. Be like, oh, it's okay. It's not your fault. It's the gynocentric social order's fault. As opposed to, and this is why I differentiate between Andrew Tate and these guys. Andrew Tate is cringe. He's a hyperbolic representation of masculinity. For all we know, he only cares about just making money and doesn't give a fuck about his followers. Entirely possible. But at the very least, he takes the standpoint of being like, of more that fatherly big brother type role, of saying like, yeah, maybe, women are this, and that nowadays. But what the fuck are you going to do about it, bro? You just going to sit there and fucking bitch and complain? Or are you actually going to go do something? That's more sort of that cold shower, icy fatherly love, right? But a lot of people demonize him because of that. There's a lot to criticize about Andrew Tate, but you should not criticize him because he is being harsh toward his followers to try to drive them to action. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. That's the type of stuff that the herd, the people who actually want the last man to live a life of comfort, if they criticize that part of Andrew Tate, they're criticizing the wrong thing. And so I'm fine if you were critical of Andrew Tate. Absolutely, you should be. But if you're critical of the fact that he speaks his mind and that he's controversial and that he makes fun of weak people that in order to drive them to action, if you're making fun of that part, you are part of the problem. You're part of the reason that society is getting worse and worse and worse. And more people are becoming nihilistic. More and more people are committing suicide because they're losing meaning in their lives because they're living too comfortable lives. I just explained this. Maybe, yeah. That's the central thing. They're mommy manispherians. And it's the blind leading the blind too. Like they're not fit to be actual sheep herders. Again, what I'm trying to do with this channel is to not influence sheep. I want each and every one of you guys to be strong individuals yourself. If we say there's two types of people, let's say that there's, the herd are sheep and people who are attempters are lions. For me, rather than being a lion who has a bunch of sheep worship him, I'd rather have a tribe of lions. I'd rather have a bunch of lions who have their own thoughts and have their own disagreements with me even. And form a tribe around that. So what I'm trying to do here, I'm calling it Beyond the Red Pill. I have a website coming out soon where I want people of all different ideas to congregate together. Despite having disagreements, at the very least, we're attempting to try to seek the truth and we're willing to have discussions. That's why I'm so passionate about debates. And I judge people not necessarily on whether they are right or wrong or not. Of course, that's part of it. But a grander part, the part that I really care about, is whether you have the moral character and the courage to put your ideas out there to be challenged and to try to find the truth. So many people don't do that. Most people don't do that. I have people in the comment section, for example, that I disagree with a lot, but I very much respect and I'm friends with. So Daniel's a perfect example. He's a Ayn Randian objectivist, right? Him and I I've seen him here and there disagreeing in the comments. That's fine. But I still think Daniel is great, even though him and I disagree on stuff, because he is attempting to have his ideas out there to be challenged, to have these discussions. But what would somebody who is super insecure in themselves and actually is only trying to create a cult of sheep, what would someone say like that if Daniel disagrees with him? That person would be like, "Oh, Daniel's evil. He's terrible. He's part of the gynocentric social order." Some sort of straw man thing, right? This is why you have to be careful of politicians, of influencers, et cetera, et cetera. How do they judge people? Do they have respect do they judge people on their character or do they judge them on their beliefs? You can have a mix of both, especially if your beliefs are an extension of your character. But the number one thing, and you do not ever let anybody shame you for this, you should be making character judgments on everybody that you meet. That's something that modern society says, oh, that's not bad. I have my truth and you have your truth and both are equally valid. Moral relativism. A bunch of sheep with no sheep herder. That's the problem with the world nowadays, right? Why can't we have discussions? If you disagree with me, why can't we have an honest, good faith debate and talk about it? And this is why I'm so critical of Fresh and Fit and Rolla Tomasi. What's the reason that they don't want to have a discussion with me? Not now, but especially back then when I was very critical of them. And I had very good, you know, a lot of people agreed with me in my criticisms of them. It's because they are trying to conceal the truth. They don't want their truth to be tarnished if somebody comes in and challenges it. Right? And so, yes, I made a character judgment at that point because I had an invitation for both of them, and they both received my requests. Robo even said on a stream, and Fresh and Fit acknowledged it in a way as well. The fact that they denied it from there told me everything I need to know about them. Everything. If you are a content creator, if you are an influencer of ideas, if you're trying to lead any sort of movement or ideas or whatever, and you are not willing to have discussions with your opposition, you're not willing to have discussions with people who might potentially disagree with you, you are not fit to lead. You're not fit to have these discussions. Is that a character judgment? Absolutely. And that's why, for example, you can't separate the ideas from the character itself. Nietzsche believed that every philosopher, everything that he philosophizes about is a direct reflection of his own life. So he believed, for example, Kant was very boring and meticulous and categories and shit in his in his philosophy because he lived a very boring life. Immanuel Kant never left his hometown. He just like kind of sat there and just theorized all day. Funny enough, Daniel, I'm predicting Daniel as an objectivist will be like, yeah, Kant fucking sucked. Yeah. So you should judge other people's character, but in a way also be just as critical toward yourself. For me, I am critical of other people's character, and I'm okay with that because I am equally, if not more, critical of my own character. And if you're not doing that, then you're a hypocrite. But that's required. That is what's required for self-improvement. That's required for growth. You need to be radically honest and humble enough to understand your flaws and what you need to work on, your shortcomings, your strengths even. That's what self-improvement's all about, is being radically honest with yourself. And if other people aren't doing that, then one, you should invite them to do that. And then if they reject that, then you should call them the fuck out because they're literally making humanity worse. Because they end up spreading their toxic ideas like a fucking cancer. And they need to be stopped. Okay. So let's continue here. Okay, so this part's very important, right? So this is where the tightrope walker comes in. Now, the tightrope walker, I'll just give you sort of the tightrope walker is a very admirable man, and Zarathustra believes him to be an admirable man. Again, it makes sense from what we were talking about, right? Man is a bridge between beast and Ubermensch, and anybody who is attempting the perilous trek between beast and Ubermensch is an admirable person, right? So Zarathustra very much respects the tightrope walker here. So keep that in mind as I read this. Then something happened that made every mouth dumb and every eye rigid. For meanwhile, the tightrope walker had begun his performance. He had stepped out of a small door and was walking over the rope, stretched between two towers and suspended over the marketplace and the people. When he had reached the exact middle of his course, the small door opened once more, and a fellow in motley clothes, looking like a jester, jumped out and followed the first one with quick steps. "Forward, lame foot," he shouted in an awe-inspiring voice. "Forward, lazy bones, smuggler paleface, or I shall tickle you with my heel." "What are you doing here between towers? The tower is where you belong. You ought to be locked up, and you block the way for one better than yourself." And with every word, he came closer and closer. And when he was but one step behind, the dreadful thing happened which made every mouth dumb and every eye rigid. He uttered a devilish cry and jumped over the man who stood in his way. This man, however, seeing his rival win, lost his head and the rope, tossed away his pole, and plunged into the depth even faster, a whirlpool of arms and legs. The marketplace became as the sea when a tempest pierced it. The marketplace became as the sea when a tempest. A tempest is like a storm. So anyway, the marketplace became as the sea when a tempest pierces it. The people rushed apart and over one another, especially at the place where the body must hit the ground. Zarathustra, however, did not move, and it was right next to him that the body fell, badly maimed and disfigured, but not yet dead. After a while, the shattered man recovered consciousness and saw Zarathustra kneeling beside him. "What are you doing here?" he asked at last. "I have long known that the devil would trip me. Now he will drag me to hell. Would you prevent him?" "By my honor, friend," answered Zarathustra. "All that of which you speak does not exist. There is no devil and no hell. Your soul will be dead even before your body. Fear nothing further." The man looked up suspiciously. "If you speak the truth," he said, "I lose nothing when I lose my life. I am not much more than a beast that has been taught to dance by blows and a few meager morsels. By no means. Oh, sorry, I should have a different tonality. By no means," said Zarathustra. "You have made danger your vocation. There is nothing contemptible in that. Now you perish of your vocation. For that I will bury you with my own hands." When Zarathustra had said this, the dying man answered no more, but he moved his hand as if he sought Zarathustra's hand in thanks. So that's basically after that, Zarathustra basically just takes him. He leaves the town, takes the tightrope walker who just died on his back, and he tries to find a place to bury him because he reveres him, because he tried to make the trek from beast to overman, right, from one place to another. And so, who is the tightrope walker in this situation? Well, what is the tightrope walker? The tightrope walker is us, right? We aren't the Ubermensch reading this. The tightrope walker in this metaphor and in that story is you and I, the readers, the people that he's writing for, the attempters, the ones who are willing to make that attempt, to try to become the Ubermensch. And in the attempt of doing that, we will most likely fall. Somebody, like that one asshole that tripped him up, somebody will try to stop us. And they probably will, at some point, some indignant beta male, whoever it might be, society, whatever, they will probably stop us, and we will probably fall on our faces and die. A very intense way to look at it. Again, the point of the higher men is to pave the way for the Ubermensch. What are we paving ourselves in? We're basically paving ourselves with our own bodies, with our own blood. Because trying to do that, it's very tough. There's this one saying in marketing. I was listening to this earlier today. Russell Brunson, the CEO of ClickFunnels, he said something along the lines of like the first mover. So if you guys know what the first mover is in a market, it's the people who come up with the new idea, right? So, for example, who's the first mover of phones or smartphones? The iPhone, right? But a lot of times, the first movers of a market, they have a bunch of arrows in their back. The implication being that, like, oh well, arrows in your back, like you're in the frontier. You're like you're a pioneer. You're a pioneer of a new movement. You're a first mover. But by being a pioneer, imagine being like the first white guy to like trek into or one of the first white people to go into Indian territory back in the day. You probably died. and then people were just like, well, where are all these, where's Billy? Where are all these people that went out west? Like, what happened to them? Oh, they're dead. And look, their scalps are missing. What the fuck? And, the very first people who had enough balls to go out into the unknown, they usually got punished for it. And so that's what great men are. Great men are higher men who understand that. They understand that they're probably going to fail. They're probably going to get arrows in their back. They're probably going to fall off the tightrope. Not because, and a lot of times it's not because they fucked up. It's because somebody sabotaged them and therefore leading them to fucking up. Because, like I was saying before, and this is what Nietzsche believed, um, any great man was the bad conscience of his day. So, if any great man who's attempting to be great is the bad conscience of his day, people just automatically think that you're, a demon, you're just an asshole, you're a bad person. Then they're going to go out of their way to try to trip you up in the process. But despite knowing that, the great men of society still make that attempt anyway, even though it's irrational, because that's who they are, right? That fire inside of them, that passion, they do that. And I'm telling you, the reason, and some of you guys could probably, feel that too. It's like when you're drawn to self-improvement, when you're drawn to challenging ideas in a certain space that you're in. So for me, the manosphere, you're going to have a lot of arrows in your back, man. I mean, think about, I don't know if you guys all know my sort of history in the manosphere, but like, I'm like the Voldemort of the manosphere. Everybody fucking hates me. Right? Because I challenge their ideas. I'm like, no, that's bullshit. That's fucking cope. Like, I can count on like one hand the people in the manosphere that actually like me. You know, because I'm willing to fucking just challenge them. I don't just plug myself in the matrix. I say, no, you're fucking trying to plug people in the matrix. I know exactly what you're doing, and it's wrong. So fuck you. Right? Well, I have a lot of arrows in my back, man. I mean, it's happened to me earlier this year with Coach Whitepill and everything. Happened earlier than that with the Fresh and Fit fanboys coming after me. Happened earlier than that with the Black Pillars trying to always debunk me and stuff, expose me, whatever, right? And so anybody who comes in with very original ideas and is willing to call people out on their shit and is willing to fight for what they believe in, the space that they're in, they're going to have arrows in their back. They're going to have that asshole that goes onto the wire to try to trip them up. And sometimes they're going to succeed. And a lot of times, unfortunately, you're not going to have somebody there to catch you. Just not. But you're that fire within you to seek the truth is so strong that you do it anyway. You do it anyway, knowing that you're probably going to fail, that you're probably going to fall on your face. You're probably bad things are going to happen to you because of your obsession with trying to seek the truth. That's the true red pill, man. That's more of a red pill than anything you're ever going to take when it comes to the reality of women, all that stuff. Those red pills pale in comparison to the red pill of you knowing that if you live your life with principles, integrity, trying to seek the truth, trying to be as radically honest with yourself and others as possible, most people can't handle that. They're not going to like that. In fact, they're going to actively resist that. And more than likely, you're going to be punished for that rather than being rewarded for it. It's a brutal truth, man. Nietzsche knew that for himself. He was the bad conscience of his day. He died in poverty. Now, hopefully, it doesn't always have to be the case, because there's a lot of great people who go against the grain and end up living great lives. And we want more of that. Hopefully, we want more of that. But in a society where that's mostly filled with sheep, people who crave the last men, people who say, oh, no, somebody who's trying to go against the grain, punish him. Fuck that guy. It's much tougher for those types of people to arise. Nietzsche talked about this himself. He said that there's so many great men who never could actually become great men because of what he was just talking about there. Society sabotages them, whatever. They fall so hard from the wire that they can't get up and they die. And so that's one thing that we can do as higher men, is to try to change society and change the culture, what's in our power of like, what is a man? What is masculinity? What is strength? Right? Change the conversation of that to allow people to actually flourish, to allow people to actually try to make that attempt from beast to Ubermensch. So many people don't even have that opportunity because they just fucking die beforehand, or they don't even know these concepts, you know? And so maybe, maybe I'm speaking to a few, but I think you guys can probably relate. There's probably something in your life that is very meaningful, that you're super passionate about, that everybody else thinks is fucking stupid. They just do. They're like the people in the crowd that Zarathustra is trying to talk to, and just one in through one ear, out the other. Or more specifically, they're just like, oh, the bad thing that you just said, we want the bad thing. The good thing, we don't want that. That's stupid. Also, when this tightrope walker is going across, even though we're there, we're entertained by him. As soon as he falls, we're not going to catch him. We're just going to walk away. That's another great way to describe great men who attempt things. Everybody's around being like, oh, look at this great man trying this great thing. But then as soon as, he screws up or something, then everybody leaves. They don't give a fuck about him. And so that's what self-improvement feels like. It feels like this journey that you're taking alone, that like deep down that there's something really meaningful about it. Maybe you can't put words to it. Maybe it's irrational. But and everybody just judges you around you, and they say like, oh, it's just like, that's just fucking dumb. Self-improvement's stupid. Why do you put yourself through this stuff? Why not just work a 9-to-5 job and saving your 401k? And why don't you just be a normie? Get back in line. Get back in the herd. What are you doing? It's the biggest red pill you can take, man. Because we'd like to think, with our blue pill Disney movies and stuff and all that like, oh, well, if I just live and operate with integrity and do the right thing, then life's going to work out. Not always. I think in the long run, it will. But in the short term, you're going to go through a lot of suffering. And you should have so much conviction in your beliefs and what you're doing that even if it doesn't end up with you living a good life, you still do it anyway. That's where the irrationality comes in. That's where the passion comes in. And Nietzsche believed himself to be a very passionate guy. And despite his intellect, despite everything, he still believed that, in a way, irrationality is just as real, if not more real, than rationality. It's a dangerous idea. And it's not something that I 100% agree with. Because I think those two things, I think rationality and passion can go hand in hand. They're not always in conflict with one another. But, yeah. So, man, this kind of went all over the place. But I hope the main thing that I want you guys to take away from what I was just talking about there is that not just the Ubermensch, but an ideal man, the type of man to strive for, is somebody who's making the attempt. That's how you judge people. That's how you should judge other people. That's how you should judge yourself. Not just specifically whether you're right or wrong, logically speaking. Of course, that's important too. But the character of the individual. Again, what Walter Kaufman said at the intro of this book is that Nietzsche wasn't concerned whether you are right or wrong or not. He's concerned with making the reader, you, grow as a person. To be radically honest with yourself of where your values are, why you believe what you believe. Are you trying your best to become great? Are you the man on the wire? Are you the man on the tightrope, living dangerously? That's one quote of his, which is great, is to live dangerously. Don't live a life of comfort. Live a life of danger. Go out there and take risks, man. That's what life's about. I'm telling you, as somebody who's a perpetual risk taker, and most of the time when I take the risk, I fall on my face. But I'm telling you, despite the bullshit and stuff that I've been through in my life, and some of it's been on public display here, others I haven't shared, and maybe I will share one day. The amount of conviction and belief and gratitude that I have for living this life. The idea of, the eternal return, the eternal recurrence. Are you willing to live your life over and over again despite the fact that me at 28, my entire adult life has mostly been suffering. Yeah, do it again, baby. Because the meaning that I've found from that suffering is so much greater than anything. It's the meaning of life itself. I'm willing to go through this bullshit and stuff and to still keep seeking the truth despite how much it's sabotaged certain areas of my life, because that's why I'm put on this earth. I know that I'm supposed to do it. I know that I'm probably going to fall on my face going across that wire, but I'm still going to do it anyway. And you guys might be asking yourself, okay, well, how are you able to interpret Nietzsche like this? You know, is it just, did you read it all? Like, did you read it somewhere? No, I mean, not really. I've read analyses of him and stuff, but like, you're going to be able to understand Nietzsche best the more and more that you go out there and you live life, and you start to realize, yeah, the things, the metaphors that he says, you're able to connect the dots if you live a life of a decent amount of suffering yourself. And the best way for you to find meaning in your life, because the thing that allows you to go through that suffering, whether it be, dieting so hard to the point where your dick stops working in order to step on stage to see how much you can push your limits. Doing this is suffering this whole 30 days. I mean, doing the 30-day stream, right? But if your meaning and your purpose is strong enough, then you will do it. Another famous quote of Nietzsche is, "He who has a why can bear any how." So more specifically, how do you find that meaning? We're going to have to cut it short here, but how do you find that meaning? I'll give you sort of a idea of it later. The existentialist movement is all about that. How do you find meaning in your life? And I think the best people to describe it that I found is Fyodor Dostoevsky, as well as Viktor Frankl. Fyodor Dostoevsky has one short book that summarizes kind of his entire philosophy and the finding meaning in this book called The Dream of a Ridiculous Man. It's a life-changing text. When I read it, I was in tears. It was just amazing. But basically, the idea is you don't go out there and search for meaning. Meaning finds you. And the way that meaning finds you is you go out there, you live your life, you live dangerously. And in the process of living dangerously, meaning will find you. And in Dostoevsky's work, I'll give you a small spoiler alert, but not really. I mean, it's still worth reading regardless. In The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, it's a story of this guy who's contemplating killing himself. And he's just like looking up in the stars, wondering like, oh man, I wonder what the meaning of life is. Life sucks. I don't know what I'm going to do. I guess I'm just going to kill myself because I can't find meaning. And while he's sitting there bitching and complaining like a black pillar, a young girl, a really young girl, like 10 years old or whatever, runs up to him, and he's like, she's like, I can't find my mom. I don't know what to do. Help me, please. And then the guy just like ignores her. And he's like, oh, I wonder what life is like. And then later, as he becomes wiser, he goes through kind of this entire journey to realize, oh, me being this asshole, sitting up, looking at the stars and being like, oh, I wonder what the meaning of life is. Literally, the meaning of life was there right in front of you. That girl needed your help. So like, sorry, I'm getting emotional. It was just such a profound thing. So you trying to seek meaning in your life, that's the whole point that we, go through self-improvement, self-development, that type of shit, right? And usually a lot of times the thing that you're looking for is right there in front of you. You might be thinking to yourself, oh, my life sucks. What's the point of all this? Well, have you thought maybe that like one of your close friends maybe like reached out to you, or a family member that really needed you, but then you're just like, whatever, right? That happens to us all the time, man. The meaning in our lives are literally like, it's a lot of times it's just right there, and the way that you find that meaning is living dangerously. You live dangerously, you live enough life experiences, you will discover your meaning. because your meaning ends up inevitably finding you. The more life experiences that you live, the more meaning will find you. And this logically makes sense. Because if you're one of the Nietzschean last men and you're just like sitting in your apartment all day and you're not doing fucking shit, do you think that person has meaning in his life? No. Why does he not have meaning in his life? Because he's not living life. He isn't putting himself in any opportunities to let meaning find him. So existentialism, it's amazing, and it ties into self-development, self-improvement. So let me just conclude this presentation here. So apparently I'm a fraud. F-R-A-U-D. See, this is these are the types of people I'm talking about, guys. You talk about this types of stuff. Some of them, it just goes right over their head. And look, here's another thing that I learned from Dostoevsky too. You need to, even people like this who hate you and are flinging shit at you. You know, what I used to do is I would react back and be like, no, fuck you. But instead, if you have a true love for humanity, you should think to yourself, okay, you should try to love humanity as a whole, including this person, even though he's flinging shit at me right now, right? Think of where that comes from. Why is this person doing that? What in his life has led him to do that? If you truly love humanity, you'll love your enemies too. This is a fundamental thing that actually Nietzsche didn't necessarily believe in, but it's something Dostoevsky believed in, and that's why I'm kind of studying him more. So native, even though right now you're spamming my chat, I can't help but think, hey, I don't like you. The humanist in me, I'm trying to force myself to empathize with you and like you regardless, and to love you regardless. I don't know you, but I love you. And that sounds cringe and weird, but if everybody could look at humans that way, imagine what the world would be like. It's very tough to do. It's very tough to love your enemies. Very tough. It's something I still struggle with and I'm trying to get better at. But imagine if we have a world where somebody can say something like that, saying I'm a fraud, and clearly using that to try to hurt me. And then instead I say, you know what, man? It's okay. I know you're going through some stuff, but I love you regardless, because you're a human. I'm a human. And in another life, you and I are brothers. We're best friends. It's just not in this life, you know? And so Dostoevsky actually has this in his magnum opus, called The Brothers Karamazov. He tells a story. There's a story that one of the main characters, Ivan, was Ivan. I think it was Ivan. Oh wait, no, fuck. What was his name? Shit, I don't remember. I think it was Ivan or Ivan. But he tells a story of the Inquisition. So basically, it was a thought experiment of the Spanish Inquisition with the Inquisitor and Jesus, and both of the and Jesus comes back, and the Inquisitor and Jesus are basically sorry, the Inquisitor and Jesus. So it's the second coming of Jesus, right? The Inquisitor, if he's like the leader of the Catholic Church, he should be like, oh well, Jesus, you're back, yay! But instead, the Inquisitor just wants to maintain power, and he actually convinces the public that Jesus is evil. And so he's imprisoned Jesus, and he basically says, hey, you know, we're going to execute you now. And he's made a public statement to execute Jesus. And Jesus responds by going up to the Inquisitor and kissing him. Not because Jesus is gay, right? But Jesus saw through the facade. He saw through the Inquisitor's facade, saying that, oh, the Inquisitor is only attacking me because he's never actually had true love in his life. He's only been about power. Nobody's actually seen him for him. So when Jesus did that to the Inquisitor was like shocked. He didn't know what to do. It was like you know, moment. And so after that, he was like, well, I still hate you, but I'm not going to execute you. So I'm going to leave the door open. You can leave. And so that's one of the things I was talking about, of like what Dostoevsky, for example, he says that love, unconditional love for humanity, love is the thing that's more powerful than anything. It's irrational, but it's the thing humanity needs, and it's more powerful than anything. Because in a way, what Jesus did there in that story was more of a power move than anything he could have done. Of saying like, "No, Inquisitor, fuck you, I'm gonna punch you." Like instead, he like overcame that guy's hatred with love. And dude, it's incredible how profound that is. It's incredible because you could argue. So Nietzsche believed that the will to power was the highest thing, um, and and Dostoevsky disagreed with that. But in a way, you could say that love is the most powerful thing. As corny as that sounds, but in that scenario, what I just talked about there, it's true. That's why when it comes to when Jesus is the whole thing of like, oh, turn the other cheek. It's not necessarily not. He's not necessarily saying like, oh, well, just like, um, just let people beat you up or just take it like a bitch. He's like, it's more so like turn the other cheek when somebody slaps you and be like, go ahead, do it again. I don't care. It's fine. I know you're slapping me for whatever reason. You're punching me for whatever reason, but I love you regardless. Go ahead. If this is what you need to do, if you need to keep punching me, it's fine. Let it all out, man. I love you regardless. And he does it. Like, imagine how powerful that is. That's literally like a pattern interrupt. Imagine somebody punching you and slapping the shit out of you. And you're like, this is stupid what you're doing, but if you need to do it, it's fine. I still love you regardless because you're my brother. You're a human being. I'm a human being too. I love you. This is why religion's powerful, man. And, you know, Dostoevsky, a lot of his ideas are antithetical to Nietzsche's, but they also kind of go hand in hand in a way. And yeah, so I'm going to be covering Dostoevsky another time soon. That's yeah, it's a lot. Reading Dostoevsky made me. So Jordan Peterson, in his debate with Sam Harris, he was basically like, dude, he was basically to Sam Harris. He's like, how can you say that you don't believe in God when you've never read Dostoevsky? And for me, when I first heard that statement, I'm like, what the fuck is this guy talking about? And then I read Dostoevsky, and now I kind of understand what he's saying. Because you can almost just logically, like, it's some of the stuff that he talks about is just so powerful and so genius. I was like, it made me rethink a lot of stuff. And it kind of it made me rethink some of my positions when it comes to Nietzsche, but it also helped me kind of, it helped kind of reinforce my ideas of Nietzsche as well. All this stuff is tied together, man. And, you know, I'm amazed that even, I think eventually a few hundred people will watch this. Probably won't reach the thousands mark, but that's okay. But I'm amazed that there's even a few hundred people that can share my love of philosophy and reading these great minds to try to use what they talk about in our own lives with self-improvement, self-development. So I'm so appreciative of each and every one of you for sticking around and supporting this channel and supporting this in any way. You know, it's a blessing. I don't make like a super good living, but I make enough of a living that I can do this full time. And I cannot even describe to you how thankful I am. So anyway, enough of the emotional stuff. Let's bring this back up. Yeah, so okay. So we kind of covered all these topics and stuff, but yeah, so where to start with Nietzsche? Because obviously there's a lot to go through. I wouldn't read this. I think a good place to start with him are secondary texts. So a secondary text isn't exactly what Nietzsche wrote, but people analyzing Nietzsche's works, kind of like similar to what I did here today. So I'm going to give you guys a few. I'm going to do a few. What's it called? Suggestions. Let's see here. Of what to read. So there's one really short book that's really good. Okay, it's called Nietzsche by Michael Tanner. I'm going to put it up here right now. Let's see. It's called Nietzsche. by Michael Tanner. All right. So this book here. This book, I have it on Audible. I prefer audiobooks over reading for the most part. I think this book was only like 3 or 4 hours long, but it gives you the general overview of all Nietzschean philosophy, and it's great. Um, so let's say after that, after you've read some secondary texts like that, I wouldn't suggest getting this unless you like have a because a lot of the primary texts are in here. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is in here. Twilight of the Idols is in here. The Antichrist is in here. I think there's a few others too. Kind of like the main points of some of the other works. Actually, his Nietzsche's best works and my favorite works, Genealogy of Mortals and Beyond Good and Evil, aren't there. Speaking of, the place that you should start with Nietzsche is the Genealogy of Morals for sure. It's still my favorite work of his, and it's a little bit kind of straightforward. It's kind of cool because it's almost told in like a story. He talks about basically like the Romans and how the Romans, how the Jews were a reaction to the Romans and the Christians were a reaction to the Jews, and then like where does philosophy and stuff come from? Where does our ideas of right and wrong come from? What's the genealogy of those? That's a big thing that Nietzsche focuses on in his work is values and from a philosophical standpoint, meta ethics, which is basically kind of going beyond like, well, funny enough, one of his great works, Beyond Good and Evil, right? Where does our idea or our evaluations of good and evil come from? Where do our evaluations of the good and bad come from? So Nietzsche is the greatest meta ethicist of all time, observing where do our values come from, right? Our sense of right and wrong, our sense of ethics, where does that come from? And so in the Genealogy of Morals, he explains that. And once you kind of understand where they come from, then you can start to kind of weave through and be like, oh, I kind of understand. I'm starting to get what he's saying here. So start off with a few secondary texts, then the Genealogy of Morals, and then after that, I would read Beyond Good and Evil. So interesting enough, Beyond Good and Evil was written right before the Genealogy of Morals, but I think you should read the Genealogy of Morals first. And then also Twilight of the Idols is good. And then he has other works before Zarathustra. The Gay Science. I know it sounds kind of weird. The Gay Science. What the fuck? Kevin Gay Wilder exposed. Am I right? Gay meaning joyful, right? So the Joyful Science. That's also a big work of his, which was written before Zarathustra. That's actually where he first proclaimed God is dead. His famous quote about God is dead and we have killed him. That comes from the Gay Science. That I still haven't even completely read through myself. I'm still in the process of it. But I will say, yeah, so start with the secondary text, Nietzsche by Michael Tanner. Like I said, this is a great one to give you a general overview. It's very short too and very compact. Anything by Walter Kaufman. The one book that he wrote, I haven't actually read it myself because I don't have the Audible version. I should probably buy it, the physical copy. But he wrote a book for that kind of made everybody change their minds about Nietzsche in the West, especially right after the World War II, and people thinking that he was like this evil piece of shit because Nazi propaganda, which completely bastardized his works. So it's called Nietzsche, Philosopher, Psychologist, Antichrist, I believe. So yeah, that's worth reading, even though I haven't read it myself. But anything by Walter Kaufman's fantastic. And then, yeah, so I would go Genealogy of Morals, Beyond Good and here's how I do it. Okay, I know I'm kind of all over the place here. Let me try to think, because this is how I read it: Genealogy of Morals, Beyond Good and Evil, Twilight of the Idols, and then maybe Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Because you guys just understood like what I read there. If I didn't explain what he was saying, you'd probably be like, what the fuck am I reading? Right. So you have to have a good understanding of Nietzsche's core concepts, like a really good understanding for you to read what he's talking about in Zarathustra and for that to make any sense. Because otherwise you're just like, what the fuck am I reading? You know? So I would read Zarathustra last for you to really be able to understand what he's saying. Yeah. So I hope, yeah. So yeah, well, thanks for watching. And this is my favorite stream. This is my favorite stream for sure. I love talking about this stuff. And I'm just flattered that there's anybody even willing to hear me talk about this shit. And I love it. And thank you so much for, in one way or another, even if you're just a viewer, even if you're not a paying client or you buy any of my products, regardless, the fact that you're just there to listen to me, even if it's for free, thank you so much. Because in one way or another, you're allowing me to dedicate my life to talking about these types of things. And I love you for it. So thank you. So I'll see you guys in tomorrow's stream, and let me know if you like watching this type of stuff, and I'll make more of it. You know, even if it's not popular, even if less people watch it, even if it's less financially lucrative, I know deep down in my heart it's meaningful, and I'm put on this earth to talk about these ideas. And so I'm more than happy to share what I found through my own life discovery of talking about these things. And I would love to share it with you guys if you want to continue seeing that. So thanks so much for watching. As always, see you guys in tomorrow's stream. Bye.